Good evening. I'm the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Interviews, where I interview creators of vampire-related media. You thought I was going to say I interview vampires? One day. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking with Sam Irvin, film and TV director of more than 50 films, including Elvira's Haunted Hills, and author of the newly released book, I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter, How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. A full-color photo coffee table book jam-packed with dozens of interviews that Sam Irvin did as a teenage monster kid in the 1970s, up close and personal with all of your favorite horror film icons of that era. Yes, tonight we are interviewing the interviewer himself, behind the scenes with horror royalty. And you are in for a monstrously dishy treat. Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So good to see you again. It's been
Again.
almost exactly 2 weeks since we parted.
It's crazy. I know. It's amazing that 2 weeks ago we were in Transylvania together. Can you believe it?
It seems like a dream still.
It does.
I actually have had dreams about it. I'm like, oh, I'm back there. No, wake up. We went to Romania and then Transylvania, which is part of Romania, which I had not realized. I thought it was like a separate thing. But now I know. I learned so much about Romanian history, a lot about Vlad the Impaler, a lot about Transylvania as a region. But we were actually there for Elvira reasons, right?
Yes, we were. I directed Elvira's second movie called Elvira's Haunted Hills, which we shot there in 2000 in a studio outside of Bucharest. It's now called the Bufta Studios. It's in a little suburb named Bufta. And we also shot on location in actual real locations in Transylvania. A church there served as the entrance to the castle. And there was a marketplace that we staged right near there and some other locations around Transylvania. So this tour was a 9-day excursion of Elvira superfans. There were 30 of us, revisited all of these places where we shot the movie. And Cassandra Peterson hosted us, and it was just this remarkable, fabulous thing. And we all bonded because we're all super fans. And it was just, it was so, I mean, it was very moving, ultimately.
Yes.
I was really touched by the whole thing.
We all got along so well. It was my first time ever traveling alone. I've never traveled alone before. And I was like, well, you know, there'll be other Elvira fans there. I'm sure we'll make friends. These are like best friends for life now, like the bonds we made.
I know. We really bonded. It was like summer camp or something. It was just so much fun. And also for me, I had made other films in Romania as well. The first two films I made were Oblivion 1 and 2. They were sci-fi westerns with Julie Newmar and George Takei and some, other great genre people. And I was able, well, all of us were able to go to another studio where we built the entire Western town for that movie and see that it is still standing to this day, still being used, which was just incredibly moving. And the same people run the studio, and a production assistant from our film is now the second in command of the studio. And I was crying, and it was just, it was an amazing, the whole trip was amazing, really. It was incredible.
And you posted a lot about it on your Instagram and stuff, right? So people can go see all the little videos you made, all the pictures you shared.
Yes. Yeah. Instagram and Facebook, especially. I'm kind of an old school guy. Facebook allows you kind of unlimited, and I sometimes get long-winded in my stories. So the text-wise, you're going to get the most complete version if you go to Facebook. On Instagram, I always have to edit it and forget Twitter. I mean, come on, I can't deal with a half a sentence.
Does Twitter even exist anymore?
Yeah, I know. Don't even get me started.
You took us to all the cool places. I was so happy that you were there along for the tour. The tour mostly got promoted as this Elvira Cassandra thing, but to me, it kind of felt like the Sam tour, mostly because you stole the show. You were there telling us everything entirely along the way. I learned so much cool stuff about movie making, about the movies you made, about the locations and just the way everything worked there, and like Romanian history and culture and all that stuff too. It was such a great experience.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I've had so many experiences there anyway. I've made 4 films there. I directed a rock opera at the Opera House. I did all these things. So it was my second home for quite a while. And so it was going home for me in a way. It really was. And I just loved hanging out with all of you because I'm one of you or you're my tribe. And it was just fun. It was just so much fun.
It was so much fun. And you told us when we were there, which I didn't know beforehand, that you just had a book come out. So
yes,
that's why we're here now, because I want you to tell everyone about this book, everything you told me. And
okay.
the reason why I'm interested in on this show is because you have interviews in there with a lot of classic horror icons, stars from vampire movies of yore, everything that we love on this channel.
Yes. Well, it's called I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter, How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. And you'll see from this caricature at the bottom, me in a coffin as a bobsled being chased by Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Ingrid Pitt, and all the other monsters. And this is a spoof, obviously, for those who know, of the Frank Frazetta caricature at the bottom of the poster from The Fearless Vampire Killers.
Yes.
And which is one of my all-time favorite movies and one of my all-time favorite posters. And my friend Dan Gallagher is a big fan of Frazetta and all this kind of stuff. And he did this fabulous artwork and did a whole bunch of cartoons of some of the funnier things that happened in my life on the inside. Now, what is this book? Okay, it started out as a collection of 35 interviews that I conducted as a teenager with horror royalty. I was doing the interviews because I put out a fanzine called Bizarre when I was a kid, when I was 17. Well, actually starting when I was about 15 and 16.
When was this? What era are we talking
early 70s. Started in 72, and I did one issue a year during my summer break of school. I'd work on it. And when I graduated from high school, I begged my parents to send me as a graduation present to London so I could visit all of my like Hammer film, idols like Christopher Lee, who was Dracula and all the great Dracula films, Peter Cushing, who was Van Helsing, and also Dr. Frankenstein and a bunch of them. And Vincent Price, who was American, but he did so many films in England. He practically is an honorary Anglophile. And Diana Rigg and Ingrid Pitt from The Vampire Lovers and all these great things. So I wanted to collect all these interviews that are great time capsules into a book. But then I started writing the introductions of how I bamboozled each of these interviews, especially as just this little, teenage kid coming over from America. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, small town kid.
Hey, Asheville.
And yes, exactly. And so as I started writing all these, the background stories were sometimes even more interesting or as interesting as the interviews themselves. And they were really funny. And then I realized I really had this very strange, charmed childhood as a closeted gay kid, monster movie fan, and all this. And I decided, okay, it really needs to be a coming of age memoir, sort of half and half. So it's half of that and half the interviews. And it's a huge book. It's 350 pages. It's all color, black and white
photographs,
color photographs, posters, artwork. It's incredible. And the foreword is by Cassandra Peterson, aka Elvira. And I decided that I wanted to give 100. Yeah, there we go. I decided that I wanted to give 100% of the profits from the book to an LGBTQ plus charity. And I talked to Cassandra about it, and she recommended the Trevor Project, which benefits LGBTQ youth. And I thought, oh my God, that is absolutely perfect because this is all about my coming of age as a closeted gay kid. And so, yes, 100% of the money from this book, 100% I'm talking about, not, sometimes they say a portion of the profits, which means, like half a percentage of, a half a percent. Every penny goes to the Trevor Project.
And since you produce this book yourself, that's a lot of pennies, right? You didn't have that much overhead.
It's a significant money. And the book is available. I self-published it through my own imprint, which is called Knuckle Sandwich Books. And it's through Amazon. So you can get a hardcover, a paperback, or even an audio book edition.
Oh yes, tell us about the audiobook. This is so exciting.
All through Amazon. Now, the audiobook is only 21 hours. And I narrate all of the memoir parts and all of the questions to the interviews, but I decided that I would get guest stars to come to do the answers of the interviews. So if they were still alive, like Jane Seymour, Stephanie Beacham, Linda Hayden, Madeline Smith from the Vampire Lovers, all these great people, they all agreed to come back and record their answers, which was just phenomenal. I was so honored and thrilled. And then I got other actors for the people who are deceased to do them, like Juliette Mills does Diana Rigg. They actually knew each other. They starred in a play on the West End together back in the 60s. So she was thrilled to do that, and several other guest stars. And of course, Cassandra narrates her own foreword. And then my friend Julie Brown, the very funny Julie Brown of Earth Girls Are Easy and Just Say Julie from MTV, she does my author bio at the end. And so I have just a really fun sort of star-studded affair. And you can get that on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. And I'm just so proud of it. And I'm also very proud that I just won the Rondo Award, which is the Rondo Hatton Classic Horror Film Awards, for Writer of the Year for this book. And I'm just really, really, really excited about that. They announced the awards ahead of time, and the ceremony is coming up at Wonderfest in June, which I'm going to be attending, and I'll be getting my trophy, and I'm just like really beside myself. It's just couldn't be more thrilling.
And June is a great month for all this to be going on because it's Pride Month.
That's exactly right. So true.
So tell us, why were you a teenage monster hunter? Why was teenage Sam into monsters to start with?
Well, the very first horror film that I remember seeing that changed my life, I was 5 years old in 1961, and my dad owned movie theaters. And they, parents back then, watch Mad Men, but they didn't really parent like parents are today, where you're nervous about, is this going to affect our child? Is it going to give them emotional damage? There was none of that back then. My parents let me see anything and everything. And I went to see this horror film called The Pit and the Pendulum, starring Vincent Price in 1961 at my dad's theater. And his office was in the theater. So, I was just sitting in the auditorium by myself. Dad was out in the lobby in his office. And it scared the hell out of me, number one. I fell in love with Vincent Price. I just was absolutely mesmerized by him and Barbara Steele, who's so creepy in that movie, and everything about that film, and especially the pendulum and the blade and the guy strapped onto the slab and this blade about to slice him in half. It completely changed my life. And in talking to Cassandra Peterson, she had exactly the same experience in her childhood with a Vincent Price film, only for her, it was A House on Haunted Hill. And she was about the same age that I was. And we both had these seminal sort of moments where Vincent Price movies just changed our lives. And flash forward, decades later, when she decides to do Elvira's Haunted Hills. And she has me come over to talk about possibly directing it. And she hands me the script and goes, now, this is a spoof of the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, Roger Corman movies like Pit and the Pendulum. Are you familiar with those? And I said, Cassandra, here is the monologue that Vincent Price says at the end of the film. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell. Hell, the neverworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny, thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which he can never or hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally. Now, she cocked her head, looking at me like I was insane, and said, you're hired.
The right kind of insane.
Yes, it was exactly the insanity she was looking for. And I had learned that monologue in school, like junior high school, when we were given an assignment to learn a monologue, and they were thinking like, Shakespeare. Well, I'm allergic to iambic pentameter, and I suggested, how about Edgar Allan Poe? And they were like, fine.
Oh yeah, sophisticated.
So I went home, and back in those days, this is long before home entertainment. There was no video cassettes, no DVDs, nothing like that. I had taken reel-to-reel tape recorder and held the microphone up to the TV speaker and recorded the sound of different horror films. And one of them that I had recorded was Pit and the Pendulum. So I was able to transcribe that monologue and prepare it for the class. Now, I knew that it wasn't exactly Edgar Allan Poe's words. Mm-hmm. It was the screenwriter, Richard Matheson, but I certainly wasn't going to tell my teacher that. And if my teacher suspected something was a little funky, she looked the other way, and I got an A. And those words are committed to my brain forever. Now, when I met Vincent Price as a kid, he was touring in Oliver as Fagin in Atlanta, Georgia, and I got my mother at gunpoint to go drive me there to see it. And I was probably 14. And I did it for him backstage when we went backstage afterwards. And there were other fans standing around, and I got applause, and he was amazed and everything. But it made an impression on him, and he remembered me. So then I met him one other time, and he was like, Sam, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh my God, he even remembered my name. So then when I went to London, and I wanted to interview, this was when I was 17, and I wanted to interview Diana Rigg, who was Emma Peel on the Avengers TV series in the 60s, and she was a Bond girl on Her Majesty's Secret Service. But she had played Vincent Price's daughter in Theater of Blood, and it opened just like a year or two before. And I wanted to interview her so bad, and I wasn't getting through to her people, but I decided she's performing in Pygmalion on the West End. I want to see her on stage, so I'll get a ticket and go see the show, and then maybe hang out at the backstage door and see if I can at least get an autograph, or maybe talk to her and get an interview. So I get into the theater, sit down. Just before the curtain rises, I hear this laugh behind me that's very familiar. You know the laugh from Michael Jackson's Thriller at the end. That's Vincent Price's laugh. I turn around, and it's Vincent Price.
He's right behind you?
He's right behind me. And before I can open my mouth, he says, Sam, what are you doing here? And so I tell him, and he goes, well, I mean, you're coming backstage with my fiance, Coral Brown, who's sitting next to him, who was also in Theater of Blood, one of the theater critics that he kills. And so they take me backstage and introduce me to Diana Rigg. And of course, she ends up doing the interview for me. And, it was just, it was incredible. So, I mean, the monologue, but getting back to that, learning that monologue, it enabled me to be memorable to Vincent Price and actually become his friend. And we became very close friends. I developed a film project with he and Coral that did not, unfortunately, get off the ground, but we spent 2 or 3 years working on it and different drafts of the script and everything, and became very close with Vincent. And I talk all about it in the book. There was even a possibility of intimacy, which was unrequited, but it was definitely there. And and we remained friends right up until the time he was incapacitated at the end. And but we talked by phone, and he wrote me letters right up to the very end. And it was just, he was the sweetest man, and I absolutely adore him with every ounce of my soul. And Cassandra Peterson also became very good friends with him over the years. And when we did Elvira's Haunted Hills, we dedicated the movie to him, and it's our love letter to him for sure.
So there's a lot of discourse out there about why spooky things especially speak to people in the queer community.
Yes.
Was that any part of your connection to it growing up?
Yes, absolutely. The one thing that I always point to was my favorite film of all time is Bride of Frankenstein. And I am enormously drawn to the Frankenstein monster character. I was, as a child, I always thought of him as sympathetic, and especially in those first two movies, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, with Boris Karloff playing the monster. And they were directed by James Whale, who was a gay gay and had a very, very big gay sensibility, particularly in Bride of Frankenstein. It's one of the gayest films you could ever see if you look at it from that perspective.
Just like the way he put it together.
Absolutely. Everything about it. And the characters, even Dr. Pretorius is the first openly gay character in mainstream cinema, and is very obviously gay in that movie. And the monster, we identified with him because he wasn't a cruel person. He wasn't he didn't intend to go out and kill people. He was misunderstood. And when people thought he looked horrible, they would try to kill him, and he would end up killing them because he was stronger than them in self-defense, or whatever. And he was just this freak of nature who was misunderstood. Hello. And as a kid, I don't think I immediately understood the connection. But as I got older, boy, did I ever. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh my God, no wonder I was crying rather than screaming about his character. He never frightened me. I was always so empathetic with his situation. I mean, in Bride of Frankenstein, there's the famous bit that's spoofed in Young Frankenstein and in practically every movie, where he befriends a blind fiddler in this little hut in the woods. And the reason that the blind fiddler, that he can become friends with him, is because of the blindness. He doesn't see how ugly the creature is and how frightening the creature is. And they start to develop this friendship. Now, when you look at it through the lens that this hermit in the woods is very likely a gay man.
Yeah, why else would he be driven out into the woods?
Exactly. Another outcast, another outsider. And he is making this friendship with this man. It's the most beautiful. The scenes are exquisite and very touching. And then two woodsmen stumble in, they see the ugly creature, they think the ugly creature is doing something terrible to the woodsman, and they start to attack him, and he has to kill them in self-defense. And then, he has to be on the lam, and it all, blows up in his face. But it's the perfect example of the queerness and gay sensibility in that film, that when you look at it through that lens now, you really see, wow, James Whale was really onto something, and sneaking it in there in a commercial way that would be palatable and get by the censors and everything else. But it just spoke to me, and it spoke to so many other gay people as well. So I'm always drawn to that. Now, flash forward to 1973, and NBC does a two-part Frankenstein film called Frankenstein: The True Story, which is also one of my favorite films of all time. And now we're talking about taking the gay subtext to the nth degree. You know, it's still for network television in 1973 when being gay is still illegal and considered a mental illness. So, you know, it's still subtext. But I mean, as a 17-year-old watching this on TV, it spoke to me like a megahorn. And come to find out, the screenwriters are one of the most famous gay couples ever, Christopher Isherwood, the great author of the German, the Berlin stories that Cabaret is based on, and his lover, Don Bacardi, who's one of the most celebrated portrait artists in the world and has his paintings in the collections of every major museum. And the two of them wrote the gayest Frankenstein ever. Dr. Frankenstein is this 22-year-old gorgeous hunk played by Leonard Whiting from Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. And he brings to life a beautiful creature. This was their innovation. Not a creature who's ugly and horrifying. It's a beautiful creature. And now we have this homoerotic relationship between the doctor and his Adonis, his Adam, that he has brought to life in this gorgeous form of this perfect human being. And he has to teach him, you know, basically the brain has amnesia and everything that he's put in it. And he has to kind of teach him everything, how to speak, how to have manners and whatnot. And after all of this teaching, almost like in My Fair Lady and Pygmalion,
yes,
he presents him to this high society, takes him on a date to the opera. I mean, it's all there. It's all so obvious that there, you know, this is a queer relationship. Even though, of course, Dr. Frankenstein has a fiancée named Elizabeth, but she's kind of shoved aside and, you know, and ignored. Every time she comes to visit the laboratory, she's like, "Sorry, darling, you'll have to go." And then things go awry, and the creature starts to deteriorate and starts to become hideously ugly. And the doctor starts to lose his love for him and ends up abandoning him. Now, Dr. Frankenstein, everybody thinks that the monster is always the monster in these movies. It's always Dr. Frankenstein who is the monster because he abandons his creature. And so he ends up abandoning him because he loses his looks. I mean, what an indictment of gay men, and pretty real, pretty realistic, I'm sorry to say. And again, I'm crying for this poor creature because, again, he's this sympathetic, misunderstood freak of nature and no fault of his own, et cetera, et cetera. And he just he just wants to be loved. And there's a blind fiddler who he befriends. They do all of that. They do all these homages to the earlier films. And there's even a female creature that's brought to life in the form of Jane Seymour, who rejects him. And in his fury, he had brought. The blind fiddler had a granddaughter who got run over by a carriage, and her head was decapitated. And he loved her, and he brings her head to the doctors and begs them to bring her back to life. But when they bring her back to life, she's a changed person. She's evil. She hates him. She rejects him. And so what happens? He rips her head off because he wants the love that he remembers. Now, everyone is horrified. Oh my God, he's ripped someone's heads off. But that's not really what his motivation was. It was that he wanted her back the way that he had her before. It's just all so sad. Anyway, I love that film. I have written about it. I wrote an entire magazine. I mean, I wrote about it in my fanzine, and I interviewed Jane Seymour and a bunch of people way back when I was a teenager. But then many years later, in 2017, I did an entire magazine of magazines called Little Shop of Horrors. I did the entire issue on the making of the film, and I won a Rondo Award for Best Article of the Year for that. That led to Shout Factory getting me to do all the extras for a new restoration Blu-ray of Frankenstein, the True Story. And I interviewed on camera Jane Seymour and the screenwriter Don Bachardy, and also Leonard Whiting, who played Dr. Frankenstein, the Romeo from the Zeffirelli film. And I did the audio commentary, and I won the Rondo Award again for Best Audio Commentary. And now I'm really happy to announce, for the first time anywhere, I haven't told anyone this, I am expanding all of that into a huge coffee table book that'll be coming out this fall for the 50th anniversary of the film. So you heard it first right here. But it'll be available this fall, which I'm really excited about. And it'll be a huge tome like this, you know, it'll be 350 pages and it's going to be absolutely amazing.
Oh, that's so cool. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited. But getting back to your original question, yeah, it's Frankenstein monster that I identify with. And the whole outsider theory of why gay people identify with horror, I think that's the perfect example of it, at least for me, for sure.
When you were going after your interviews, were you ever trying to find that sort of connection with the other people who are in that horror world?
When I was first doing them, probably not, because I was still closeted. I was still very nervous about people suspecting that I was gay. So I was being pretty circumspect about that kind of stuff. I wanted to ask them, especially when they had done things that were that had homoerotic undertones and things like that. I desperately wanted to ask them about it, but I shied away from it in those early days. Nowadays, of course, when I interview people, especially in connection to Frankenstein, the True Story, it's all about uncovering and bringing to light, was this done intentionally, or am I just reading into it? And boy, it's very interesting, because the actor Leonard Whiting, who played Dr. Frankenstein, was not fully aware of what was going on. And when I interviewed him about it, he was like, well, I think that's more your interpretation. I don't think we were really thinking that. And I said, well, I don't mean to contradict you, but in talking to Don Bachardy, who co-wrote the script with his lover, Christopher Isherwood, they very much meant that, and they very much were sneaking in all of this gay subtext.
Because sometimes as a writer, you can just put that stuff in there because that's your truth, and you're not like actually having an agenda or planning it, but they actually really intended it.
They intended it. And the producer of the film, Hunt Stromberg Jr., was gay, very flamboyantly so. He fanned the flames of this. He was trying to get as much gay subtext into the film as he could possibly sneak by the network censors. And he called, and there was a gay editor, there were gay cast members. He called themselves the Lavender Hill Mob. And
Nice.
and it's like their little gay mafia of trying to sneak in as much as they possibly could. And the more I uncovered of all this, it was just absolutely astonishing how much they were able to sneak in, and how many gay actors were in the film and things like that. It was definitely intentional.
And for the main actor to not even see it, like the straight goggles are strong, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And yet when I talked to other actors, they were like, oh, of course we knew, But also, Leonard Whiting at that time he was only 22 when he made the film. So he was very young, and it just didn't occur to him. And they may have decided that it might not be good to tell him. I don't know. They may have feared that he might not have received that information well, or whatever. But
he did the job they wanted him to do, right? Like
he did the job they wanted him to do. And boy, when you see the close-ups of the doctor and the creature, and when the creature comes to life, the words out of the doctor's mouth are beautiful. And it's all there. It is all there. So it's pretty interesting. But Leonard, the actor, took it well, and he's come to terms with it, and he embraces that whole agenda now.
That's great. Back then, we did have homoeroticism in female-led movies like The Vampire Lovers and all of that. Yeah. And the censors seemed fine with that.
Yeah, they did.
Double
But there was
standard.
yeah, it was a double standard. But there were little fleeting moments of so the one that I always love is in the Fearless Vampire Killers, which was 1967. Um, the main vampire, Count Krolok, has a gay son vampire who
Herbert.
Herbert, exactly, and he chases Roman Polanski around that balcony, and is very very interested in little Roman, and that actually is a direct spoof of Hammer Films' The Brides of Dracula with David Peel as the vampire in that film. Now, again, I find that is all gay subtext in that movie. I don't know if you've seen it, but
Yes, I have seen that one.
there's this whole Oedipal thing with his mother, and she has him chained up in his bedroom in the castle because she is worried that his unnatural tendencies will get out of hand. And so she's chained him up in the room. I mean, this is just like your homophobic parents not wanting their gay child to to go out to the bars at night or something. I mean, it is, for me, it's just a neon flashing sign that there's this gay subtext going on. And the actor David Peel was gay in real life, and I am absolutely certain that he brought that outsider sort of thing to his performance. Dracula was established with Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee with the slick back, black hair and all of that. Well, David Peel's vampire is blonde.
He's like
and his
fabulous,
locks,
right? Like the
fabulous.
flowing locks. He's like Prince Charming.
He's a Prince Charming with his hairstyle and everything. And they used a very similar hairstyle with Herbert in The Fearless Vampire Killers, which is, an obvious play on that. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are, you can trace back some male counterparts to a degree in some earlier films. But, the lesbian vampiresses, that dates all the way back easily to Dracula's Daughter, which, by the way, is one of Cassandra Peterson's absolute favorite movies of all time.
It's an incredible movie.
It really is. And, obviously Cassandra, now that she's come out and has her girlfriend Terry of 20 years and everything else, it takes on new meaning as to why she may have been attracted so strongly and affected so strongly by Dracula's Daughter. The lesbian vampiress does date back, and there was Blood and Roses, the Roger Vadim film, and different things like that. But man, you said it, the vampire lovers, woo, that just, there's no holds barred on that one. I mean, I saw it in my dad's theater in 1970 when it first played. And I can't even begin to express how shocking that movie was to audiences, to me and to audiences. First of all, anybody who knew anything about Hammer Films or Peter Cushing or anything like that, the sexiest they'd ever gotten was some heaving cleavage up to that time. That was it. There was never any nudity, never a nipple shown. There was nothing like that. And so, oh my gosh, the new Peter Cushing movie, Hammer Films, yay, let's go see it. Full frontal nudity of Ingrid Pitt, full nudity with Madeline Smith and Kate O'Mara and all these things. It was like, whoa, what is going on here? They've completely gone to softcore porn practically. And it was shocking. My dad, people complained. They said this belongs in the adult theater down the street. But the complaining just made more people come.
Of course. No such thing as bad publicity.
That's right. And it was only scheduled for 1 week and ended up being held over for a second week. And it was because it was just so provocative and out there. And I even have to admit that at the time, I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with Ingrid Pitt. I became very good friends with her and visited her twice in England. And when she came to the Famous Monsters Convention in New York in 1975, she got me to be her aide de camp for the weekend. I mean, it was incredible. I absolutely loved her. And I interviewed Madeline Smith in my book, and Madeline is still with us, and she's going to be on a panel with me with my book in London in November. I mean, it's a movie that has really resonated with me in so many personal ways. And I interviewed the director, Roy Ward Baker, way back when. But what I was going to say was that even though it was kind of a guilty pleasure, I was like, wow, it's almost a little tawdry for Hammer films that were so, kind of uptight up until then. And
British.
Yes. And I was even a little not offended or anything, but just it was hard to get past some of the nudity because it was so shocking. Now, by today's standards, with nudity everywhere, it's nothing. And in recent years, I revisited the film, and I was finally able to watch it on its own merits without having the shock value of that startling nudity. And it's a really good film.
It is.
And
it's like sophisticated, right?
Yes.
It's not, I mean, tawdry maybe in a sense, but it's like classy tawdry, right? It's
yes. And
got this gravitas to it. And she's such a powerful character that you don't feel like, she's being objectified or being taken advantage of. It's empowering even.
Exactly. I love everything about it. And it's if you've ever read Sheridan Le Fanu's novella that it's based on called Carmilla, it's incredibly faithful to this 1800s book that was written decades before Bram Stoker's Dracula. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of groundbreaking in so many ways, and I just absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite Hammer films for sure.
So in all of your film work, which has been much, you're a very prolific filmmaker. Have you ever been able to bring any of that into any of the projects that you've worked on? I know you don't always do horror, but
right,
anything at all.
I know I've directed over 50 films, and a lot of them are not even in this genre. A lot of Hallmark Christmas movies and romances. I do a lot of Lifetime thrillers, that kind of thing. I would love to do more horror films, but I'm really old school horror. There's not a lot of horror that I love after 1980. I'm not really into the slasher movies and that sort of thing. I love the classic stuff, the vampires, the Draculas, the Frankensteins, the Vincent Prices, all of that is really my wheelhouse. And that's not what anybody wants nowadays. The companies and networks are not putting their money into those kinds of things. So Elvira's Haunted Hills, for me, was the most fun I've ever had making a movie because it just was in my wheelhouse in every conceivable way. And we were able to design and build the sets from the ground up. And I'm like, well, let's match what Roger Corman did. Let's have the gears of the pendulum exactly like this. I mean, it was perfect for my sensibility in every way, shape, or form. And so I mean, if I could direct those kinds of movies all the time, that's what I would absolutely love to do. But times have changed and it's just not happening. I have done other horror things. I did a series called Dante's Cove, which was a gay horror, supernatural witchcraft series. And I directed every episode of all 3 seasons. I'm very proud of it. It's very sexy, and I just had a blast. The main witch in it was played by Tracy Scoggins, and she always said in interviews that her character was a cross between Joan Collins and Barnabas Collins. And she's absolutely right, because it was our show was kind of like Dynasty meets Dark Shadows. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of a primetime soapy sort of thing, but it was mostly gay. What we did is this. It all takes place on an island, and it was mostly gay men, and we were trying to have this universe where being gay was the norm, and then we had a few token straight characters. It's kind of just flipping what what normal, quote unquote, normal movies and TV shows were. And this was made in 2005, 6, and 7. And back then, we'd had Queer as Folk and a few other shows with leading gay characters, but this was groundbreaking in that, it was very gay. I mean, very gay, and lots of full frontal nudity and the whole thing.
What network was it?
Oh, it was Here TV, which was a gay premium channel. So it was on a gay channel, and they had a mandate that said we had to have at least one moment of full frontal male nudity in every episode.
Well,
a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
You got to do it.
And we had some lesbian characters and a couple of token straights, and it was great. I mean, looking back on it now, there's lots of other flavors of the LGBTQ plus community that could have been represented, but it was of its time. And if it were to be redone nowadays, I'm sure they would. I don't know if I'd be involved. I would love to be. I'm sure that the rainbow flag would be represented in a much broader way. But it was, I wanted it to be. I resisted. There was a little coming out story with one of the guys at the very beginning in the first episode to get him to the island, where he was basically, his parents rejected him when he came out, and he was fleeing, that world to come to this paradise. But other than that, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be Queer as Folk and do the gay community issue of the week. I didn't want to deal with AIDS and with coming out and with, politics, gay marriage, all those things. I just wanted a popcorn show. I wanted it to be matter of fact that we have all these sexy gay guys who are lusting after each other and getting into all sorts of horrific situations because of the horror aspects of the storylines, and just go in that direction. And other shows that came after us, I think, were definitely influenced. The Twilight movies, True Blood, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was of its time and was influential. And I had so much fun doing it. It was great. And then, sort of hand in hand genres like the Oblivion films that were sci-fi Westerns, and they were in that sort of genre, but supernatural stuff going on with some of the characters. And then I've done a lot of thrillers and murder movies and things like that. I did Acting on Impulse, which was about a scream queen actress who's played by Linda Fiorentino, whose producer has been found dead, and they think she's the murderess, and she has to go on the lam and try to prove her innocence. And I just peppered it with all these scream queen actresses making cameos in it, and
Nice.
it had everybody from Cassandra Peterson to Nancy Allen to Mary Warnoff to Brink Stevens to Zelda Rubinstein from The Little Woman from Poltergeist, and just really cool casts of people from the genres that we kind of are drawn to and love. And so yeah, I've kind of done a little of practically every genre, really, and I love it all. I just love directing. And but yeah, if I could do 5 more Elvira's Haunted Hills types of movies, I would be on cloud 9 for sure.
So would I. I want to see that. When you were doing all these interviews as a kid, did you already know you wanted to be a filmmaker too?
I did. When I was 8 years old, my dad took us on a cross-country road trip to the West so we could see the Grand Canyon and go to Disneyland and blah, blah, blah. And he got us a VIP tour at Warner Brothers. And I walked onto the set of Blake Edwards' The Great Race. And they were shooting a giant iceberg scene in a huge tank of water and 2 antique cars on the iceberg, and Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Peter Falk, Tony Curtis, all on this iceberg with wind machines and wave machines. And I was as an 8-year-old kid, my eyeballs popped right out of my head. I was like, I had no idea that they could create all of this on a soundstage. I thought if they were going to shoot an iceberg, they had to go to the North Pole and wait for the storm. And, I just couldn't believe it. And then we saw other stuff that day at the studio. We saw a forced perspective model of a house up on a hill that was about 6 feet tall, but it was this, model of a huge mansion. And then down the bottom of the hill, they had a full-size gate and one of the actors going through the gate. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, that's not going to look right. That looks like a toy house. In the movie, you totally buy it.
You do.
And then I went to the set of Two on a Guillotine, which was a horror film that was actually intended for Vincent Price, but he was not available and they got Cesar Romero instead. But they were doing this rear screen projection scene at an amusement park, and the actors Dean Jones and Connie Stevens were sitting in this bullet sort of bubble gondola thing that had been sliced open so the camera could see them in the seat. But behind them out the windows was rear screen projection of, them flying around on this ride. And again, I'm blown away. I'm like, oh my God, I never realized that's how this was done or how it could be done. And so it was, the whole day was like a magician showing you all his secrets of how he made these magic tricks happen. And so by the end of that day, I was like, that's it. All I want to do in my life is direct movies. So from 8 years old on, that's been my absolute laser focused goal. I took my dad had an 8mm home movie camera. I took it out of his hands and never gave it back. And I started making little Dracula movies with my brother playing Dracula with a black beach blanket as a cape and catch up for blood. And we had the plastic fangs. And I got a coffin. I had a coffin as a kid. I was known in school as the guy with the coffin table. My parents knew this used car dealer, and he was selling an old hearse, and he decided to build a cheap plywood coffin as a joke or something, probably Halloween time or whatever, to just put in the back of the hearse. And it was just your simple vampire movie wooden coffin, and the lid was hinged so it could lift up, and it was the angular kind of shape,
a good shape.
Yeah. And I took one look at that and I'm like, I have to have that. And I said, are you, can I buy that? And I was probably 13, maybe 12 or 13. And he said, well, I just sold the hearse. I don't know if the owner is expecting the coffin to be part of the deal. I'll let you know. Well, the owner of the hearse didn't want it, and he gave it to me.
Aww.
Well, but now how am I going to get it home? So now my mother has to call a friend with a station wagon and explain that my son needs to go pick up a coffin. This was rather embarrassing. I can't believe I put my parents through.
Oh, I'm so glad they were supportive of all this.
Yes, they were. And so once I had this coffin, I used it for my films. And between my films, it was in my bedroom as a coffin table. And the lid was, when it was closed, it was flat. But on the inside, I kept my collection of famous Monsters of Filmland magazines, and all my magazine collections were in there, including some male physique magazines that I had hidden in the bottom. And so it was a great kind of storage trunk / table. And so, yeah, anybody who came over, that was the big thing that you had to go see in my bedroom was that coffin. And but it's also, it's all so interconnected. It's just so crazy. On that poster for the Fearless Vampire Killers with Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski, and Jack McGowan in the coffin as a bobsled, it was drawn by Frank Frazetta, and Frank Frazetta had a very famous signature, but his signature doesn't appear on this artwork for practically the only time ever. And I figured, they must have cut his signature off when they designed the poster. No, the way he signed it was he carved his initials FF into the wood of the coffin in this drawing. And so I thought that was really clever. So I put my initials SI I carved it into my coffin. So even in my movies, there's this little Easter egg where you can see my initials carved into the coffin. And if you notice, in the artwork on the cover of the book are the initials SI carved into the coffin.
There it is.
And so it's another reason why I'm sitting in a coffin on the cover of my book, because that's the coffin I had.
As you were developing this book and you realized, oh, this is becoming a memoir, and it sort of took its shape, did there end up being any sort of arc to it, like a journey, sort of?
Boy, was there ever. I had no idea going in how emotional it was going to be. It was, I mean, it's hilariously funny, all these amazingly funny things happening all the time. But at the same time, it was, you know, revisiting all of that, also revisiting my whole sort of closeted gay childhood and the difficult relationship that I had with my parents. And then also my relationship with Vincent Price, which I went into great detail about, and I broke the rules. I was going to always end the book at 19 and not go beyond my teen years, but I do in the last chapter own up to it and say, we're going to break the rules here because I want to give you the rest of the story of my relationship with Vincent Price. And it dealt with our intimate relationship, and it dealt with, you know, the period of time when I divorced my wife and I met my husband, Gary, who I've been with for 41 years, and the first time that I got to introduce Vincent to my boyfriend, and that was the first time Vincent had seen me after I had come out, and all of these things. Oh my God, it was so emotional. It just was, it brought tears to my eyes, and reading Vincent's beautiful letters to me brought tears to my eyes. And when I read all of this in the audiobook, you can hear the emotion in my voice. Mm-hmm. When I read the last letter that Vincent wrote to me, I was literally just, my voice was cracking. And I said to the engineer, I said, we better do that again. And the engineer said, no way in hell.
He knows gold when he hears it.
The emotion is what makes it. And you know, I'm glad we left it in the way it was supposed to be. So yeah, it was an enormously emotional journey, and which made this award for Writer of the Year all the more meaningful to me, because it was such a personal project. It just meant the world to me.
And it feels almost like a two-part thing. Like you have to have the physical book for all the pictures. How many pictures did you say are in here?
There's only 600 photos.
Only 600.
Only 600.
But then you have to have the audio to hear all the voices.
Emotion. Yeah,
your emotion, but then all the guests and everything
guest stars. Thank you. I agree. I think everyone should get both. And it's for a good cause. I mean,
very good cause.
Be a salesman, you know, unabashedly, since all the money's going to the Trevor Project.
So you're going to read us a little bit of it, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
You can bring one of your funny stories to us.
Yes. Let's just give you a little taste. I picked a little funny bit. The day that I had been corresponding with Christopher Lee, who I was, you know, huge fan of because of his Dracula movies, of course, as we all are. And I had been corresponding with him as a super fan. And I had actually interviewed him through the mail with a questionnaire for one of my early fanzines. But when my parents agreed to send me to London for high school graduation, I immediately wrote to Christopher Lee and told him I was coming. And he wrote back and he said, great, let's have lunch. Call me when you get here. And he gave me his number. So when I get there, I called him and he said, well, I'm actually working. Would you mind coming to Pinewood Studios and we'll have lunch there? And I'm like, that sounds fabulous.
How old were you? So, you were 17?
Yes, I was 17. Okay. This is 1974. And, you know, he was busy. I didn't want to ask him. I didn't want to keep him on the phone. I didn't ask him, like, you know, what are you working on or whatever. And I didn't know. I was just so innocent. So when I got there, I find, we have lunch in the commissary, and I think, when you think of commissary, I'm thinking, cafeteria with trays and paper plates, and no, 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 no. This is a very fancy dining room, white tablecloths, with you know tea services and everything, and uniformed waiters and linen napkins. It was absolutely gorgeous. So we're having this wonderful lunch, and hardly anyone else is in there because he's been broken early while they're working on other scenes. They broke him early for lunch. And he tells me that the film he's working on is The Man with the Golden Gun, which is the James Bond movie in which he plays the man with the golden gun, the main villain. And it's the biggest film he's ever made. And it's just like, what? I can't believe it. And I was as big a James Bond fan practically as I was of the Hammer films. So I was just dying. And so I do the interview over lunch and everything. And then as we're finishing, then other people start breaking for lunch, and in walks Roger Moore and Britt Eklund and Maud Adams and Hervé Villechaize, the little actor from Fantasy Island who always said, "De plane, de plane." And he's playing Christopher Lee's little sidekick, and actually was the basis for Mini Me in the Austin Powers movies.
Right.
That's what they're spoofing. So anyway, he introduces me to all of them, and but they're just starting their lunch, and Christopher says, "Why don't I give you a tour of the James Bond sets? Because no one's on them right now. Everybody's broken for lunch." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that'd be great." So he takes me around, shows me all the sets, and we end up at Scaramanga, that's his character name, his lair, which is where they're going to resume shooting after lunch. And so then everybody is coming back, and Christopher says, "Let me just stay right here. Let me go talk to the director." Now, the director is Guy Hamilton, who directed Goldfinger, my favorite James Bond movie. So I'm in awe of that, just even seeing him. And Christopher asked him if I could stay and watch the shooting the rest of the day. And they said yes. So Christopher comes back over to me and he goes, "I've gotten permission for you to stay. Just be a fly on the wall. When we're performing the scenes, don't be in our eye line. That's very important. And enjoy." So I watched them the rest of the day, and they had this dining room scene where Christopher Lee's at one end of the table and Roger Moore's at the other, and they're having one of those diabolical conversations about, well, you could have killed me. And he says, "Well, I want to savor the moment," and that kind of stuff. And Britt Eklund, the Bond girl of that one, is sitting in between them on one side of the table in her bikini, and she did not have one line in the entire scene, which just tells you what Bond girls were up against, back in those days. They were just eye candy. And Hervé Villechaize, in his little butler uniform, was serving them the food. And it was just incredible to watch, all this going on. And then there was another scene where they did the funhouse mirror sequence and guns and all this. It was incredible. At the end of the day, Christopher said, the studio gives us a ride back to London in their Rolls-Royce limousines. If you'd like to share a ride, you're welcome. And I said, absolutely. So I climb in the back of this Rolls-Royce limo, and it's Christopher Lee, who's like 6'6", and Hervé Villechaize, who's like, 2'1". I was sitting next to him in the back seat, and I get one of those fold down seats behind the chauffeur, and I'm actually facing them, sort of this captive audience member, and we start to leave the studio. Well, Hervé Villechaize is taking swigs out of a Jack Daniels bottle and is 10 sheets to the wind, already drunk. And he starts to regale us with stories. Okay, pearl clutchers out here, just be aware there's going to be a little bit of colorful language coming up, so be careful. And so anyway, I'm just going to read the section of my book to describe this journey in this limousine. Okay, so here we go. After they wrapped for the day at 6 o'clock, Christopher graciously offered me to ride back to London in one of the studio's chauffeured Rolls-Royce limousines that he shared with other actors of the film. On this particular occasion, Hervé Villechaize was already waiting in the back. Christopher climbed in and sat beside Hervé in the plush leather seat. I pulled down one of the jump seats mounted behind the driver, facing rearward, where I had a front row seat to observe Christopher and Hervé for the journey. From the limo's wet bar, Christopher poured the two of us tumblers of Johnny Walker on the rocks, neither shaken nor stirred. Hervé was already 10 sheets to the wind, glugging swigs straight from a bottle of Jack Daniels. Before we'd even exited the studio, he began to regale his captive audience with tales of his latest sexual exploits, told in shockingly lurid detail. At first, Christopher seemed a little uncomfortable, but after hearing the word pussy repeated about 10 times in one sentence, pronounced pussy with Hervé's lisp, he looked at me and began to giggle. Then I started to laugh. Of course, this just encouraged Mr. Potty Mouth to greater heights of vulgarity. Listing the advantages of being a little person, Hervé explained that when he stood facing a woman, he was the perfect height to play the harmonica, and that a full-size woman's attributes were twice as big from his perspective. On and on he went, as Christopher and I howled harder and harder. There were tears streaming down our faces. We made every effort to control ourselves, but all it took was Hervé saying pussy once more, and we'd lose it all over again. When the chauffeur dropped Christopher off at his home at 45 Cadogan Square, he seemed to have fully composed himself, but as we drove away, I glanced out the rear window and saw Count Dracula doubled over, gasping for air, busting a gut. It was the last time I would see Christopher Lee in person, and it was positively surreal. I will never forget it. Oh. And it was unbelievable. And that's the kind of charmed stuff that happened to me back in those days. It was nutty. Now that address, I'll never forget it, 45 Cadogan Square, was also the same street that Boris Karloff lived on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and Boris had passed away by then. Boris died in 1969, and this was 1973, only 4 years later. But he and Christopher were good friends, and they had actually starred together in Curse of the Crimson Cult. And there was a detective series back in the 1950s that Boris Karloff starred in, and Christopher was a guest star on one of those weeks. It was maybe a year before Christopher's breakthrough in The Curse of Frankenstein. It's just amazing that these two iconic horror stars are neighbors and friends. And Christopher Lee was also very good friends with Peter Cushing. Of course, they starred in like 23 movies together. Yeah. And they were good friends with Vincent Price. I mean, they just all were really great compadres. The most amazing thing of all is that Vincent Price and Christopher Lee share the exact same birthday of May 28th, and Peter Cushing is May 27th. I mean, all three horror stars within 2 days have their birthday. I mean,
well, that was yesterday and the day before.
Yes.
Happy birthday to them.
Exactly. I mean, it's really, it's remarkable. I mean, there's some kind of karma thing going on there for sure.
You're like born under a blessed star or something.
Yeah. Oh,
what great stories. And so many more in this book, so many more stories. You can get it in hardback, paperback, or audiobook, but not ebook, right?
Not ebook. No, you need the experience.
Yeah, you need the pictures. You need the formatting.
Need the pictures, the tactileness of it, and then the audio. You know, might come out with an ebook at some point, but I resisted that. I'm old school. I want to promote books.
I know. I love it. You know, I love a book just like a physical book. I think that makes me, what is a bibliophile, when you just like the way a book feels and looks. And,
yes. I love that experience. Yes.
And, you know, buy the full hardback, buy the big book, because all the money goes to the Trevor Project.
Yep.
Very good cause.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, telling me all about your book and reliving our wonderful Transylvania experiences.
Absolutely. And our mutual love of Elvira.
Yes. Oh, I miss you. I miss everyone. That was such a fun trip.
Yes. We have to do it again somehow.
Somehow. Yes. No, I think almost everyone who was there said that if this happens again, I will be there. I'll be first in line.
Yes. Me for sure.
Yes. Well, thank you again. It was wonderful talking to you.
It was fantastic. Thank you.